People in the back, can you hear me? How are you guys doing? Good? Awesome. So just a few quick questions that will help me a bit before I get started. How many of you already have an app? Even closer? Okay. How many of you already have an app in the market? Okay. How many of you have more than about a year or two of Android experience? Okay, got it. Cool. So that's okay. There's nothing to worry about. I just wanted to get a bit of quick context so I know just what your background is. So the good news is, I think a lot of my talk is for beginners. So what I'm hoping to do is walk you through a few things that talk about some of the complexity of building apps today. And then I'll talk about a few things that might help you build apps more quickly. And especially for someone who's a beginner, I want to sort of inspire you to build awesome apps and show you a few tools that might help you out. Okay? So, okay, Rahul is supposed to change slides. Right, sure. Thank you. Okay, here's just a quick slide. It's a quick intro about me. I've got about 14, 15 years of IT industry experience. I've been coding for a while. I've been a part of a couple of different startups, one that went IPO, one where we had an exit. And I work across Android, iOS, and Python. So I work across a bunch of different languages. I volunteered at DroidCon in 2011, 12, and 13. I'll talk a bit about DroidCon maybe later for those who are interested. That's me and my wife, Monami. We live in Bangalore. So really happy to be down here in Goa for Nitro Droid. And wonderful to meet all of you. Looking forward to spending a little more time with you and meeting all of you when you have time. And we love Goa. I was out here in Goa just earlier in Jan. There's a picture taken on Agonda, and it's beautiful. Wonderful time to be here. So if you just move on. So this talk, since I think many of you here are beginners, some students, I'm going to try to orient the talk a little more around how this will benefit you. But if some of you out here are building apps, they're targeting multiple devices, trying to build some games, social, collaborative apps, this talk will likely help you out. Some of the mileage you might have might vary, because some of these are just based on my experience, but I'd like to share it with you. And so one sort of overall pattern, and it's a bit of a, let me just ask you this. When you see this, right, is there sort of a familiar metaphor, visual metaphor that this reminds you of? Anybody? Maybe something that's East Asian, Japanese. Then yin-yang. Thanks, Rahul. So you can see there's a little bit of a yin-yang visual metaphor here, right? So there's sort of two sides to things here, right? One, we're constantly looking to enrich what we have and what we build, what we do. But as you try to enrich things, enriching things also adds a lot more complexity. And sort of the flip side to it, right, is also taking all this complexity and looking for ways to simplify it. So, for instance, with software, right, as software evolves and grows, we end up adding more and more complexity to what we build, right? You start off with something that is simple, you keep adding things, you're enriching it, adding a bunch of tons of features, new constructs, new classes, new models. Things get more and more complex as you go along. Now, on the flip side, right, you also then go back, look at this, and you look for ways to refactor your code. You look for ways to simplify certain abstractions to bring things together. And it's a constant cycle that we go through, right? If you can go to the next slide. I'm just going to walk you through just different stages that apps have gone through. If you think of sort of just apps when a couple of years back, when smartphones were still fairly new, apps were relatively simple, right? You could build an Android app, and all it did was it would talk to a backend web server over RPC or REST or SOAP that would talk to a database, fetch maybe JSON or XML or some proprietary data format. You'd use it to display things, maybe post some updates back to the server. This is familiar, right? I think enough of you have seen this. There's nothing new here. You guys are familiar with this? Just fairly simple construct. Now, it wasn't fairly quickly, right? It became clear that sort of the usage patterns in mobile were quite different, right? And invariably, you end up sort of, using your mobile phone in an elevator, turning it off, going back, checking it. There's a whole online-offline mode in which we expect apps to just work, and we expect them to sort of continue from where we left off when we turn the phones off, right? So you just go on to the next slide, please. So quickly, right, people started to work on adding an offline data store, right? So there are different approaches people took. Some used things like, SQLite, adding an offline data store. And are you guys familiar with like model view controller constructs, right? So MVC patterns. So, you looked at ways in which you could take your model state, retain this offline, and have ways in which your views would restore to where they were when your user came back online, right? You can move to the next slide. Now, things invariably sort of started to get more complex. Now, I think enough of you guys have seen this, right? Right? Nothing new here. Let's keep going. Now, the thing is, I don't know if this is the solution to that problem, right? I think for most beginners here, right, I'm sure you've at some stage hit issues where you've tried to do things and your UI thread has been blocked, right? So you've worked around those things, right? You've added a progress indicator. You've had ways of communicating to the user that something is happening. Now, is this always the answer? So there are some updates that you need to send to the server, right? And often in our apps, I'm sure you're familiar, you end up using a progress indicator of this sort. Is this always the right answer? Because even while you're showing this, your user's waiting. Sure, you're letting him know that he's waiting, right? You're telling him, wait, we're loading, and I don't know how long it's going to take, watch the spinner, and then we can continue. But is this always the right answer? Are there things you can do to avoid this? Synchronization, right? So we spoke about this just a few minutes back, but again, synchronization, right? Now, what if, and I'll go back to the survey form example, right? You fill in all those fields, and then the user hits submit on the mobile app, and often in these apps, where you're just waiting while the spinner is running. Now, most often, does it really matter? Does the user need to wait? As long as you can keep him engaged in the app, right? You save the model state locally, let that happen in the backend, and continue to let the user interact with your app and do other things. So this goes back to the problem of synchronizing data between the client and the server and not having to make the user wait. Right? So again, I'll come back to this specific point in a bit. Just keep going through the slides. So backend as a service, right? I mentioned a number of them. Many of these are fairly popular. There's enough material online about them, so I'm not touching upon them. Parse is fairly popular. StackMob's fairly popular. There's enough online about it that you can look up, so I'm not going to try to cover any of that. I'm just going to talk about Firebase. Firebase is relatively newer, and it's specifically focused around real time. Okay? I'll just quickly talk about what the key things Firebase gives you are. They give you a large chunk of cloud storage for your app as a part of the free plan, so you don't need to think about it, you don't need to worry about it. They synchronize your data real time. And I'm just going to try to do a quick demo if data holds out, but I'm amazed with just the sheer speed at which the data gets synchronized. Firebase can also help you make your app be more responsive, because like this example we shared, right, with the whole survey thing where you hit a button and you're sitting and waiting, for the service to respond. Here, you can let the user continue to use your app and do other things, while Firebase will take care of synchronizing the data here with the server. So it takes away a lot of the complexity which you otherwise, for someone who's fairly new in building Android apps, would need to worry about, right? It's great for a lot of cases where real-time elements are involved. For instance, one is multiplayer games. Right? If anyone is interested in building games, looking at multiplayer games, this is a great option to look at. You can look at some simple examples of games that you can want to start off with. If you're a beginner building apps, you could get started with the Firebase and build some fairly simple collaborative ones very quickly. If you have an app that has collaborative social features, like for instance, let's imagine if the flight app wanted to add some social features where while someone is browsing through Fried's music library, right, you want to have some interactive elements where your mom is browsing through the library at the same time with you, and you want to sort of guide your mom to tell her within Flight's library here are some things you might be interested in. Now, this is just a hypothetical example, but I'm just trying to show you that if there are some social things that you wanted to do within your app, where it's collaborative in nature, this is a great tool to help you. Finally, anything which involves live interaction or things where there are a lot of data changes frequently, like, for instance, a stock market app, where data changes really quickly. This would be a great example because the feed of data and the real-time aspect of it are really powerful. Keep going. So the Firebase setup, and I'll get into a little bit of code. How much more time do I have? You're a timekeeper? Okay, 11:06. I'll take a little bit of time to just walk you through a little bit of code, and if I have a bit more time, dive into a small project and walk you through it. So a great thing, right, is for a beginner looking here to get started with Firebase, the basics are very, very simple. Firebase lets you create a reference. You need to sort of go to their website, register, and in this case, I just set up a Nitro Droid reference, which is sort of a Nitro Droid project. Okay, and you can go in there, create what you call as a Firebase reference, and this sort of gives you within your app a reference to the data structures at the Firebase backend. So once you get this reference to the Firebase backend, let's say at Nitro Droid, with this reference, you can easily go in there and add additional data structures under that tree structure. So let's just imagine this is your root node, ref, and you can add various children to it. So for instance, you can add users, and under users, you want to collect survey data. For each user, survey data that gets submitted can get added below it. And they provide simple methods through which you can manage each of these child references and parent references. All the data that gets stored in Firebase is JSON formatted data. So anything that's just JSON compatible can be stored. You guys are familiar with JSON, right? Okay. Keep going. This is just a simple example of how you would write data to Firebase. You create a simple hash map and just set value. So by just doing this, Firebase takes care of updating your database, synchronizing any offline state, ensuring that this data gets updated correctly to your database. There's nothing else you need to do. And they have a set of completion callbacks, which are very simple, very easy to use, easy to just weave in. Now, let's say that you had set a value for at Nitro, and it lets you define a completion listener. It's just a callback that happens when the data update is complete. Okay? And in case there's an error, the error field gets populated, so you can respond to that and let the user know what has happened. Otherwise, you know that the data has gotten saved correctly. So it's a very simple way in which, if you're looking to manage some data, right, you define your own models, and you want to have these updated to the backend. It's a very simple way in which you can do it. And keep going. So I'll dive into Studio to walk you through some of this. But one of the really nice things about Firebase is you can manage various async callbacks whenever data has changed. So one of the hard parts of this problem, right, is you've got multiple clients, many things happening, and you want to know when data has changed. So Firebase offers a very simple way in which whenever any data has changed, right, your app gets a notification so that within your app you can handle this and then update your views. Okay? Note that this is different from things like GCM or any of the others, because this is within your app, and where you would use GCM or some of the other push-based notification systems for communicating various other types of changes. This is more within your app and more tied to the core functionality. You would still use a GCM-based system for notifications for when your app is not in the foreground. This is pretty much for all flows of data within your app. So where in many other cases, right, you may be familiar with sort of pull-based mechanisms where you would poll to fetch data. And like within your app, you might have some sort of a poll cycle to pull data. Here, the whole thing is sort of push-driven, where your app gets an event callback whenever state changes anywhere else. Okay, I'll go through a few more examples in just a bit. Now, few of the little things. Whenever a write happens, whenever you update data, the update first happens immediately locally, and a local event gets triggered immediately. So then your app continues to be responsive because the event has happened locally, and as far as the user is concerned, things continue to progress on. The data then gets synced to the server at some point in time. Now, it would typically happen fairly quickly, but the important thing here is within the app, you don't need to worry about it. And you just need to know that at some point, the data will go to the backend, and the view that different clients have of what their status will become eventually consistent. So there's the concept of a data snapshot. So whenever data changes, right? So let's say, take an example of the survey data, right? Collecting survey data, and these guys here are all filling in survey data at the same point. Now, let's just imagine, this is just a trivial case, but let's say within this app, there's a way in which we want to make sure that all of them know when they're filling in surveys. Let's imagine that this is an app for collecting survey data for disaster relief, right? So there's been an earthquake, and they're all relief workers, and they're all collecting data about each place about what people need, right? So they're volunteers. Now, what would happen is each of the apps that they're having would receive a data snapshot of what the others have filled in. So real time, they're all able to aggregate and look at the data together. Okay, and keep going. So again, what's the big deal? Thank you. What's the big deal? So callback happens even if data is changed on other devices. Now, a lot of constructs, right? A lot of the other things that you might build as a backend, it's easy enough to have your own app, and then something changes at your backend, and you have updates here. Here, the real-time aspect is when you have multiple people, like I said, this whole earthquake disaster relief scenario, where data gets fed and things are kept in sync across all these devices. You keep going. Data updates and events are incredibly fast. I'll try to do a quick demo in a bit and just show this to you. Now, what does this mean to you? For many of you here starting off with Android, who are still like about a year or two into Android development, I think these tools, the back-end of the service tools like Firebase, provide a great platform for you to experiment with very little Android knowledge to build awesome apps. I think there are a number of little use cases you can think of even within your classrooms. The number of use cases you can think of within your own classrooms, in your colleges, at your workplace, where you can think of little problems you can solve with this, which make for fun applications. And I hope that this will inspire many of you to explore it and come up with some great apps. And keep going. There are some caveats here. I won't get into this now. The little subtleties. And keep going. So overall, again, just to summarize, this whole cycle is enriching and simplifying. We have seen the whole app world now get to a point where we started off with some simple apps. Apps have got incredibly complex now with respect to the sort of things that we do. They synchronize between, like people having multiple devices. You want to have the same view on the web that you have on mobile. You expect data changes to happen immediately. You change something on the mobile, you want it to be reflected on the web immediately. And this is the way it's going to be. It's going to get more and more complex as we go along. Now, the beauty of it is there are these wonderful tools that now have evolved which help simplify a lot of things which we do. And I think it's a great opportunity for many of you to look for these things, to build on it, because I think this is the future with respect to where a lot of these things are going. Keep going. I'm just going to do a quick demo provided data holds out. It's just a simple app. I've really based this on code from Firebase themselves. I have not added a lot to it. It's very simple, and I'd encourage all of you to go and look at the code and play with it. It's really, really simple. Okay. For those who want to download the app right now and join us, so in a quick little demo, you guys just join in. Those who have the app, who'd like to join in a quick demo, just visit tinyurl.com/nitrodroid. Or if you've got a QR code reader, just jump in. tinyurl.com/nitrodroid. So what you guys are seeing now is live, and we'll just hopefully see if this holds out. So this is the NitroDroid chat app here. I'm just about to hit it. And we're connected. And all right, for those who have the app, why don't you guys say something, say hello. Yes, Prajot was a beta tester of the app. Thank you, Prajot. So just to give you guys a sense of just how quick this is. Anyone else who's got the app wants to just quickly join in? So, as you guys can see, we're all on like an edge connection here. And despite the fact that we're on an edge connection, we're able to sort of run through something that is real time fairly quickly, and this app holds out. I can't emphasize how amazed I am with just how effective Firebase is with some of this. Now, the code for this app is relatively simple. I don't have a lot of time. I've got only a couple of minutes. So what I'll do is I'll publish a link to the code, and I'm also around through all of today. And I'm hoping that I think later in the day, the other room's going to be freed up. So we might publish some time where we can spend a little more time going through code for those who are interested to take you through a few examples. So I think we've just got enough time for a quick Q&A. So I'll just open it up for questions now. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is, Google has come up with some similar service, something called as Google Real Time, which is, I think, similar kind of, real-time object entities which they reside in cloud, and all the consumers get the updates in real time.
Yeah.
So how this Firebase is different from?
So, see, I think a lot of people are getting into this whole back end of the service space, and part of the challenge with some of the Google backend things, at least in my experience, like with Google App Engine, is there's a little bit of a lock-in. Arguably, there's similar challenges with Parse and StackMob and Firebase as well. At least I haven't played with the Google option here. I played with Firebase, and relative to Parse and StackMob, I just find the speed at which it works blows my mind. So as a part of another project earlier, part of our team, tried building out our own real-time backend. So we were using Python, Jivin, Socket.io, Redis. We built the whole thing out. And there's a lot of complexity and challenges doing this both with Python and with Node.js. I just think Firebase blows my mind, because after all the effort we put into it, we looked at this, and these guys have totally nailed it. They're not very big. It's a startup based in San Francisco, so it's hard to say where they'll go with it. But especially, I think, in the context of people starting off, I think this offers a really simple option to quickly get going, explore some very interesting collaborative problems that you'd like to take up, and address it. So I can't contrast the two beyond that. So.
Is it on? Okay. So one more aspect to this kind of a real-time, syncing system, which is there. Probably in fact, on the Google side, basically, they have some kind of a limit on how many events an app can receive. Okay. So, and it's like a collaborative limit on the instance of apps you have in place at any point in time.
Yeah.
I think it's a kind of per day limit sort of a thing. So do they have similar thing for this?
Absolutely. All of these guys have some rate limiting aspect that they've set up. So the rate limits vary depending on the plans. So they all have some rate limits because there is some price associated with it. But I think for beginners who are starting off building an app, until you get to that point, I think it's a great place. I think the tiers are high enough that I don't think you'll hit it easily enough. Yeah. Give you a sense of speed. Yeah, so to give you a sense of scale, Flipkart's been using Power Stack Mob, and they haven't hit issues where they've gone beyond the free limit. So to give you a sense of it, you guys could easily be on this, get apps to a certain point, and not worry about having to pay for this as a service. And when you get to that stage, right, where you need to pay, you can figure out monetization models, you can figure out other options, or you can build your own backend stack. So, yeah, sure thing. Sure. Sure.
Okay, so Android in itself has something called sync adapters. Sync adapters, you can have GCM-based requests. So this has additional features as well. Like the user can decide whether he wants to update based on the Wi-Fi connection or normal connectivity. Does this kind of service offer such, benefits?
So they more sort of take the, so, they have a sort of a concept of presence, where they help you, let you manage online user presence, similar to how games work. But with respect to a lot of the other aspects of it, they try to work more like a black box. So if you're looking for more granular control, it makes sense for you to manage it yourself. But for the average app, average developer, you don't want to have to deal with all that. Right? In which case, you work like Firebase, take care of it with all those updates. And from the slides is some aspects of Firebase with respect to offline-online state and Android are still mature. For instance, with the web, they offer some options, AngularJS, where the models get auto-synchronized. Some of that's there here, and they've got, for instance, a couple of options which give you that flexibility, but it's a little nuanced. I think some of that is still evolving. So if you want deeper granular control, it makes sense in you handling it yourself. The question? On the chat. Okay, sure. Yeah, any questions? Actually, that's a great idea. We should continue to use this through the day for questions.
Yeah. Is the data that you store using Firebase encrypted by default, or you have to encrypt it yourself?
So they have authentication options. I know that encryption is one of the features that they offer. So I think it's a default. I don't think you need to do anything additional. They also have a set of authentication options which you can add on, and that's optional.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. If some of you would like to get into the code and examples a little further, try to set up some speaker hours in the other smaller room later in the afternoon. And maybe we can go through some code, and if you've got some ideas for some apps that you'd like to build, happy to sit with you and sort of brainstorm how you could use Firebase or any of these options to sort of build that out. So thank you everyone for listening, and hope you enjoyed it.